On my grandmother's deathbed, she asked me, "Do you know who your real mother is? What major plot twist moment have you had in your life?" My grandfather was dying of cancer. He was a big tough man and gradually just wasted away. Sometime near the end, he asked my grandmother to bring him a piece of paper and a pen. He wrote down all the names of his 27 grandchildren. Next to my name was a check. Nobody else had anything next to their names. My grandmother showed it to me after he died. She had no idea what it meant. I still think about that every once in a while. When I realized that my mom wasn't always sick, she was completely wasted on drugs all the time. The last thing my grandma said to me was, "See you tomorrow." And as I walked out her hospital room she said, "Not." I heard her laughing from down the hall at herself. She died 4 hours later. When I was 15, my siblings and I were put into foster care. We had no idea why until the social worker told us that parents were using drugs. Our after school jobs were helping them pay for drugs. They said our money was being saved. My dad wasn't my real dad, and 3 out of 5 of my siblings were half siblings. My real dad kidnapped my brother and I when we were babies. We were returned to my mom when he confessed to murdering a woman and then went to jail. He had since been released, and we visited him to discover that he had started another family. It was quite the mind. My grandpa was having trouble hearing, and it took us a while to convince him to get a hearing aid. In the meantime he got a phone call saying his Uncle John had died. He asked about a funeral, and was told there wasn't one. That was 2, maybe 3 years ago. I really only saw John when he came up for Christmas, but he was quite the character and my whole family has missed him. A couple weeks ago, my grandpa's cousin came to visit. Grandpa was talking about how he missed John since he died. His cousin said, "What are you talking about? I just saw him 2 weeks ago." Turns out my grandpa misheard the phone call. We figure someone else died, but we still don't know who. John's probably been wondering why no one invites him for Christmas anymore, or visits, or calls. Too long. Didn't read. My relatives come back from the dead. My twin sister and I were born through in vitro fertilization. Our mom wanted nothing more than to have kids, and her circumstances led her to use a sperm donor. When we were 3 years old, our mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. When we were 6, she passed away. My sister and I were taken in by our aunt, our mom's younger sister. She already had 2 sons and a husband. It was a crazy and emotional time for all of us, but we have become an amazing family unit, and I consider my mom, dad, and brothers as much my immediate family as my sister. You might think this was a major plot twist in my life, but it gets crazier. About 4 years ago, I learned that not only did my original mother have sperm donated to her, but she also had eggs donated to her as well, by her little sister. I lost my biological mom, only to be rescued by my genetic mom. All those years I had laughed at the people who said I looked like my brothers and my mom, but the joke was on me. When I think about the sacrifices my 2 moms have made for me and my sister, it blows my mind. Edit. This was my first post ever on Reddit. Thank you all for your replies. I definitely know I'm super lucky and loved, and I'm glad my story could brighten some of your days. I was looking for my social security card in my parents' desk, and I found their marriage certificate. It was dated 1 year later than I thought, 6 months before I was born. All of a sudden, the years of thinking my mother resented being stuck home with kids, the terrible resentful marriage they had, it all made sense. I actually found out shortly after my grandmother died that she and her husband adopted my mom. From where, or why, we have no idea. Mom and I know that we have the same type of ethnic heritage as the people she thought were her parents, which probably indicates she was adopted from somewhere within the family or close friends. Perhaps more interesting is the fact that on her deathbed, I was 100% convinced that my grandma was saying "I love you" and gathered the whole family to hear, only to realize that she was desperately thirsty and saying, "I want juice." Back when I was in college, I got a girl pregnant. When my mother found out, she broke down crying and divulged that I have a brother out there that I had never met. She had given the boy up for adoption long before I came around. I still wonder to this day if I will run into him. Not me, but I have a friend who found out that his sister, that is 14 years older than him, is actually his mother. He hates his sister. When I was a kid, my parents took me to Universal Studios in LA. When we were there, we met Mr. T, and I spent the next 20 years telling my friends that I had met Mr. T. Everything came crashing down when I had dinner one night with my parents and a girlfriend. The topic of meeting famous people came up, and I told my Mr. T story. My parents chuckled and corrected me. "You mean you met a character impersonator playing Mr. T? Childhood ruined." When I was 12 or 13, my parents took me out to eat at a restaurant. My dad gave me some change to go play a couple arcade games there, and when I ran out of money, I sat back down. My parents had completely serious looks on their faces, and my dad asked me, "How would you react if we told you that you were adopted?" I freaked out a bit, and then they moved on to a different topic. I wondered about it for years, until I realized that I act just like my dad, and I look like both my mom and my dad. When I was 7, I found my birth certificate in the basement of my childhood home. The name under father was not the man I'd believed to be my dad my entire life. I didn't tell anyone about it for years. Edit. For clarification, I'm female. Also, thank you all for your responses. The largest one for me was finding out my parents were never married, although together for 15 plus years, because my father was still married to his first wife, who miraculously got pregnant and had a child while he was in jail for a year for aiding and abetting a known felon. He's a converted Kentucky hillbilly that used to run moonshine back in the day. He refused to turn in his cousin. Multiple things occurred to me that day. My dad is a felon. I have a not quite half sister somewhere. My mother basically had a long affair with my father. I hope like hell there is no inbreeding somewhere, because this story is the epitome of the stereotypes I had heard. So recently I helped clean out my parents' basement, since they really needed it. That place was a hole. I find a box with a bunch of pictures in it, and begin to reminisce about how awesome my childhood was. Me on the NES, me at Disney World, my brother and I at a football game, but then I get to the last picture on the bottom. It is my dad, my mom, and some random that looked to be in her early 20s. The picture, judging by the hair, was taken mid to late 80s/early 90s. "Hey dad," I called. Mom was out of the house. "What?" he yelled back from upstairs. "Who is this in the picture?" I went upstairs to show him. He stared at it for a moment, blinked, and said, "That is your half-sister, Andrea." What? I pursue it more. Half-sister? What? I then proceeded to find out that he had been married before, when he was 18, to some stripper from Vegas. He lived in Arizona until he was about 30. Lorelei, or by her stripper name, Karma, what king ever, had been married to him for about a year, until he realized she was a shopaholic, shoplifting, coke dealing, heroin taking, abusive to her daughter. He got the out and gave the child to his parents to raise, because he was 19 years old. I now have a half sister who I plan to meet. My dad is a real life superhero. He has graphics and aesthesia. He sees numbers as colors and shapes, because those sections of his brain are connected in ways normal people aren't, and he used that to catch a man who was skimming accounts when he worked at a bank. If anyone's interested, I'll write out the full story. Alright, here it is. My dad worked at a bank, and for fun he'd scroll down through the account balances and watch the patterns of color. He did this just about every day, and over time he noticed more and more zeros. They stood out because they are empty space to him, and it looks ugly. He was noticing this in a couple thousand accounts too, just a few black spaces at the end of strings of color. He took it to the police because his boss wasn't listening to him. Turns out his boss was the guy skimming the accounts, but the police never took the investigation seriously until my dad compiled the evidence on his own and took it to them. My dad's a cool guy. While at a party about 5 years ago, I met a girl who I really clicked with. Friends-wise, I'm a girl. I started talking about my boyfriend, but not by that title, by name. She proceeded to tell me she knew him and had actually recently been on a date with him, and how it was the most romantic date she'd ever been on. My boyfriend of a year just got real. Yes, we broke up shortly afterwards. That girl ended up being one of my best friends. We are friends to this day. I'm so going to do that. Pick a random grandchild, and before I die whisper to them, I hope you get revenge for your real parents one day. I found out that I was adopted at a very early age. It helped that both of my parents are Caucasian, and I'm South Korean. The day we found out that the doctors were going to stop being aggressive with my father's treatment was very difficult. My grandparents flew back from Florida to get his affairs in order. Apparently my dad, a near broke alcoholic, had not paid any of his life insurance premiums. My grandparents found out and paid all the late bills, which allowed my siblings to collect on the multi-million-dollar policy. To this day I'm grateful because I didn't find out until a few days after about the whole situation. Now I have enough money to pay for college and buy my first home. Too long. Didn't read. My dad was broke when he died. Found out he had nearly $3 million in life insurance so that my siblings and I could go to school and start our lives. Mine was finding out the woman I called mum for the first 16 years of my life was actually my gran, and that my older sister was my birth mum. Apparently she got pregnant when she was 13, so her mum decided to raise me. Now I've got no idea what to call either of them. Calling my big sister mum just feels weird. Earlier this last year I was hit up by a guy on Facebook claiming to be my half brother. Fast forward a bit and it turns out to be true. I don't know the details of the hows and whys, as every story has multiple sides, but my twin brother and I have been raised our whole lives, 23 years, by a wonderful man, whom is the biological father of our older brother. There was never any hint or doubt that our dad wasn't our biological father, and we were raised with the utmost love and care by him, even though he and my mother were divorced or separated throughout the entirety of our lives. My father even had a fiancée leave him at one point because she was, apparently, unhappy that he was paying family support for kids that weren't technically of his biology. He really sacrificed a lot for us, and I couldn't have had a better dad. Hasn't really changed much in my life, honestly, and I never had any real crisis of conscience or identity about it, because hey, that sounds about right given my family history. Nonetheless, I'd say that counts as a nice little twist, eh? When my grandfather was on his deathbed, he was very much aware of what he was saying/doing. He talked to each of the family members that were there privately. When I went in to see him, we talked for what seemed to be hours, joking as if it was another one of our every second weekend camping trips. It was very strange to know he would just be a lifeless shell of what he used to be. He put his hand on the back of my neck and told me I was about to go through the toughest 4 years of my life and to not act on my depressive actions. I left the room confused and broken. He passed within half an hour. The next 4 years, and counting, have been hell. My immediate family found out my father had been cheating on my mother, and just with our emotions and thoughts over the course of a year and a bit, I failed to get my high school diploma, so I started to work full time to pay for our home. Not as big of a plot twist as some of you guys, but he kept me from killing not only myself, but my father too. I lived with my father from 4 to 16, the entire time trying to convince him to let me move in with my mom, who was 800 miles away. He never let me. I later found out this was because my mother's boyfriend was black, and he disapproved of the relationship.